All right. In the last lesson, we were talking about, Roman society, like their social classes, just kind of breakdown of how they worked, cultural influences, who's around them. And lastly, we talked about really the fundamental foundation of their power, which was in their family structure and the morals and values that the mothers were in charge of teaching, and how that was viewed as one of the most important things in Roman society is what the moms would do. Even though they didn't really hold the power. It was viewed as the most important. Anyways, again, I hope that, I don't know if you're watching this video just right after the other one, or if this is like, a few days later, a week later, but you definitely need to remember that as we continue on through, all future lessons. Like you'll see a point where Rome kind of goes away from that, and you could say they suffer the consequences of it. Anyways, getting a little bit ahead of myself there. But in this lesson, we're now going to be talking about the foundation of the Roman Republic. Everything I've talked about so far, at least when we're talking about the mythological beginnings of Rome, like with Romulus and Remus, to the foundation of their society, to the cultural influence that they've had on them, their whole societal structure and their morals and values and that stuff that we talked about already. That's all in the first couple hundred years, but they are not what we call a republic yet. They were just another a Latin kingdom in the area. Now, just long story short, I think I referenced this in one of the other videos, but the Romans were taken over. I shouldn't really say taken over, but they were ruled over by Etruscan kings. And the last Etruscan king they had, and by the way, those Etruscan kings, most of them did a fairly good job, at least from the records that we have and what they say. The Romans were actually all right and did all right under their leadership. But the last Etruscan king was just this unbearable guy, this awful, awful monarch who was just completely selfish and addicted to, just bad things. His name was Tarquinius. I think Tarquinius the Proud. I hope I'm getting it right. And the Romans just have had it with him. And it comes to this point where, I really want to go through the story right now because I find it a fun story. But just to, long story short, he basically rapes a patrician daughter, basically a patrician who is very notable in society, and just everybody's had it. And so this patrician, along with other patricians, are able to kind of rally the people and say, we don't want this guy anymore. And they raise their own army against him of Romans, and they fight this war of independence against this Etruscan king. Now, the Etruscan king, far more powerful, should be able to win this war. But through just the sheer tenacity and desire for freedom, is this sounding familiar to like the American Revolution? Well, yes, these are stories that we associate and just with the American Revolution as well, or became inspirations for the American Revolution. And it's really weird that the Roman War of Independence mimics, I said that wrong. The American War of Independence mimics in a lot of cases the Roman War of Independence. Although I guess you could say if you're fighting for independence, of course you're going to be alike in many ways. Not every way, but in a lot of ways. But again, we see ourselves as like looking at the Romans as a blueprint for our society in many ways, and this is another one of those. Their war of independence, just like we had one. But just again, through that sheer tenacity, the Romans are able to win, and they gain their freedom. But then they're faced with a problem. Do they put a new king on the throne, a Roman king? If so, which Roman do they pick? And if they pick a certain Roman from a certain family, does that make that family more important than any other family? You just have these arguments. Just, again, long story short here again. I know I'm long-winded, I'm sorry. Every time I say long story short, and it seems like a long story, but bear with me. It comes down to all the families realizing they don't want someone else like Tarquinius the Proud to be in charge. And it's possible for a Roman to become like Tarquinius, to become a bad king. Also you have this idea of like, well, I don't want that family to be in charge. And of course, other families don't want your family to be in charge. So they come up with this idea called a republic that they say is founded in 509 BC. When I say they say is founded, modern historians kind of question that, but that is the official date in the history books. 509 BC is the foundation of a republic where they do not have a king. They essentially put together a new government that essentially represents all the families and therefore the people of Rome as best as possible, and will make decisions for the future of the city of Rome. Now, right off the bat, though, you should know that only patricians are allowed to participate in government dealings. The plebeians just have to go along with it. Does that cause problems later on? Yes. Yes, it does. Of course it would. If you live in a society and you're like, I don't get a vote, do I not get a say? This kind of sucks. I've been Roman for hundreds of years. Why can't I get a say? Anyways, we'll talk about that more later. So now if you look at that bottom picture where it says SPQR, that's the Roman Republic. That's their acronym in their Latin. If I'm saying this right, I believe in Latin it's Senatus Populesque Romanus, which means the Senate and the Roman people, as this new type of government, this new, going into this new, better society type thing. So, now, what is this government like? I just said that SPQR, Senatus Populesque Romanus, means the Senate and the Roman people. Well, what is the Senate? And the Senate originally is all those patrician paterfamilias gathered together to basically vote and make laws for the people. Over time, this does become somewhat of, you could say, like a generally elected thing. But in the beginning, it was the paterfamilias. Oh, again, I just said that. Now, the next thing they do is they realize, you know what? We can't just sit around, because we will argue forever. If we're just in a big group, a lot of us don't like each other in many ways. What's going to happen to us if we need something done really quickly? Well, that's where we need people called consuls. And this becomes a lot kind of like, you could say, if you remember, we're talking about Sparta, like the two kings of Sparta, where consuls basically did... Oh, did I not put it on here? Oh, I only put one of the things on there. I apologize. Okay, something else you need to get in your notes that's not on here is that the Roman consuls, one of the first responsibilities was to be like the commanders-in-chief of the Roman armies. They're the two that decide what to do with the Roman army. They're in charge. The next power that the Roman consuls are given, and there's only two of them, like it says there, they have what's called veto power. I hope you've heard of veto. We use that in our own government. The idea that the President of the United States has veto power. A governor over a state has veto power. This idea is saying like, oh, you came up with a law? Well, I don't like that law, so it's not happening. I veto it. Now, that is an incredibly powerful thing to have as far as a republic goes. One of the most powerful powers to have in a republic is veto power. I'm feeling redundant in saying that, but I hope I'm getting the point across. So these consuls would lead the armies, and they could veto any law that the Senate came up with. So the Romans understood that if you got the two consuls on board, and they're okay with the law, and you have the majority of the Senate voting for it, then that is the direction of Rome, and that most likely has, all of Rome should be good with this, because if it got through all of those checks and balances, then you should be good. Now, to make sure that nobody had too much power over time, they said, all right, a person could only be consul once every 10 years. So you could be consul multiple times, but only once every 10 years. Now, is that rule broken? Yeah, that was broken. I don't want to say quite often, but that rule was broken for more popular people. When I say popular, not in the just idea they're popular, like everybody likes them, but for people you just realize, we need you and we need you now. Like, you need to be consul again, please. So... Now, it only lasted for 1 year as well. So again, if you're seeing this is one of those ideas that we as Americans love. We as like Western democracies love, that one person does not have too much power for too long. Excuse me. So, and yes, this is almost directly where we get the concept of the executive branch of the United States of America in our Constitution for the President of the United States. Although we did realize that having two consuls or more usually actually ended up causing more problems than it solved. Hence why we have a president, not two presidents. I'm not going to go down that road right now. It's more for a government class, but just so you know. It's one of those things where we say, hey, Rome, good idea, but we're going to tweak it a little bit. Now, this is an interesting one. The term dictator comes from the Roman Constitution, which I'm actually going to talk about on the next slide. Today we think of this term dictator, like we talked about with tyrant with the ancient Greeks, as this evil term. Someone who's a dictator, who's a tyrant, is an evil person. And the reason why we view dictators and tyrants as evil people today is because we view them as people that have all power, have total power. They can tell you what to do, and then essentially absolute power corrupts absolute, that whole idea. And yes, I'm going to be going over a lot of stories through Rome where I'm going to show that and how, like, yeah, as Americans, we're like, yeah, we're just going to stay away from that. Because did the concept of a dictator work well for the Romans? Yeah, it did. But here's I didn't put it on there. Things I should be updating my PowerPoints on, I'm sorry. Something you need to write down for the dictator is this. Dictators could be put in place when there was a national crisis, and they could only be dictator for 6 months and 6 months alone, no longer. But as dictator, they could do anything they want, pass whatever law. I mean, they literally had control over everything. Because the Romans realized that if you are in a crisis and you just need to get things done, just have one guy do it, and hopefully he's the right guy for the job. So basically choose wisely who's going to be your dictator.
Mr.
Now,
Ricks, could you please dial extension 735?
If you're hearing that, I'm sorry. Anyways, so, for instance, now, does this whole dictator thing go wrong in the future? Yes, it does. It's one of the reasons why we don't put it into our own American Constitution today. It was like, nah, stay away from that. But here's an example of a story of, a good dictator, I guess you could say, in the past that was actually very influential on us today, and that is a guy named Cincinnatus. Now, from a historian's point of view, this guy is a little bit on the controversial side, but for more of like the moral of the story type of thing, this is a story we love to tell in modern societies, modern democratic societies today, especially with our republic. And that is that Rome was in a bad state. They had an army defeated. They needed someone to come in and kind of save the day against the intruders. And there just happened to be this guy who had been consul once before, fairly well respected, and a good military leader, a guy named Cincinnatus. And yes, Cincinnati is named after Cincinnatus. And so he's made dictator. Now, he's made dictator. He's given dictatorial powers for 6 months. That's what their constitution says. And I'll talk about their constitution in the next slide. And so he goes off, leads the new Roman army against the intruders and wins, and is able to establish peace in the land again. And he does this in roughly I can't remember how many days, 15, 16, 17 days or so. Definitely not 6 months. And then so since he had finished what he needed to do, it's said that he gave up power. And the idea of I did what I was supposed to do as dictator. I solved the problem. The problem is now gone. So I'm just going to go back to my farm and just live my life. So gave up power. This is an incredibly influential story. The story I gave you. There's people that I shouldn't say there's people. There's history basically looks at this and wonders if this really happened or not. But whether or not it did, it has influenced modern day. For instance, George Washington, first president of the United States. One of his main heroes in life was Cincinnatus, the story I just told you. And it's pretty well understood that one of the reasons he gave up power after being president for 2 terms is that he just thought, you know what, someone else needs to take the reins, and I will do what Cincinnatus did. It's said that when he would sit in his study at his house in Mount Vernon, whenever you get a law or be asked about something, he'd be sitting in his study and he'd have a mural of Cincinnatus above him. He'd look up at it and say, in his mind, well, what would Cincinnatus do type thing. So basically that story I gave you, again, whether or not it's true or not, has been incredibly influential in the beginning of the United States and set a precedent that lasted a long time until you get to FDR, until you get to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The president's just okay, if you're president, you can never be president more than 2 terms. It's too much power after that. So, anyways, just like to make that correlation again between us and the Romans. Like I said, like a blueprint for us. Even if what we use as a blueprint could be a legend. Don't know. So, but moving on, the last thing we're going to talk about in this lesson is what's called the 12 Tables, which is the Roman Constitution. So, and that's all you need to put down in your notes. I don't need to talk about this that much because that's the simple idea of it. The Roman Constitution, called the 12 Tables, heavily influences the American Constitution. It's their written plan of government. And when we talked about ancient Greece, they're the ones that came up with the word Constitution in the first place, yes. But when we write our Constitution, we copied it more off of the format of the 12 tables of Rome. Like in the U.S. Constitution is, Article 1, Section 1, subsection 2, or Section 2, subsection 2A, stuff like that. It's written like that. We get this from the idea of the Roman tables. Table 4, Table 4.1, Table 4.2A. Now, I put those in there because we don't copy their Constitution exactly. We don't have it word for word. That's definitely more just format. Like I said, Sparta wasn't the only one that did stuff like that, although you could say the Romans were nicer. And the Romans at least put the word notably deformed. Man, I hope you understand I'm being very facetious at the moment. A notably deformed child shall be killed immediately. They viewed this as a mercy back then, but holy cow, that's kind of atrocious to us today. Life is, we look at our society, we look at most of the rest of society, life just, I'm not going to go down that philosophical road right now. But yeah, they did that. So, now these other ones are also interesting. I added in some that have to do with the whole slavery thing. Remember, if we talked about that with Solon of Greece. And right there, if 2b, or Table 4, Section 2b, if a father thrice surrenders a son for sale, the son shall be free from the father, meaning you can't sell him into slavery anymore. Too bad, he can live his own life now. Remember, that was one of the major problems in Athens when we talked about that. Even like in number 3 and number 4, you're realizing you have a lot of instances there with this idea of inheritance and divorce. These are problems from antiquity as well. These aren't just modern things of the modern day. These are things that caused a lot of problems throughout all of history. And we can tell that they had problems because they had to make laws on it. They couldn't trust the people to do what was, you could say, right, or stay in good favor with each other, I guess you could say. So, sorry. I think I had one more picture. Anyways, simple picture. Anyways, there you go. There's the Roman Constitution called the 12 Tables. We copy the format of the 12 Tables in writing our own Constitution today and how we write laws today. And as far as Roman government goes and the foundation of the Roman Republic and how we have looked at that as a blueprint for ours, well, again, there you go. And I will see you in the next lesson.